The Prowler, Part 6. I should have woken this morning rejuvenated, with a sense of accomplishment even. To have a constable added to my list of victims is quite the trophy. But I instead find myself waking from my slumber with a feeling of paranoia. Can I truly trust James? This thought has just entered my mind, polluting my thoughts with doubts and distrusts. The man knows my every movement. He delivers my beautifully written letters to the paper. He's the chauffeur on this journey of macabre delights. But do I really know this man? James Buckholter came to us 20 years ago, straight from Agatha Tremantle's home for wayward boys looking for employment, and after a few dirty errands my father hired him on the spot. Hell, I've known this big son of a bitch since I was in the shortest of pants. I'm sure this is all in my head, but James is an alcoholic, and it seems he's been taking to the bottle a little more regularly as of late. A man is hard to trust while carrying such an impediment. I'll be keeping a close eye on my gentleman's gentleman from now on. I cleared those thoughts and decided to see what the paper and that filth peddler had to say about me today. Prowler returns to where it all began, murders Constable. Late last night, the body of Constable Richard Wilkins was found at the north end of Denmark Street, lying face up, dead from a stab wound to the top of his skull, and his eyes were removed as the mad prowler's trophies. Last night, it was quite foggy out, so there were no eyewitness accounts to report. There was, however, a shop owner who closed up his shop seemingly minutes before the constable's demise. The shop owner, whose name, by the way, is Mr. Gerald Hughes, said he had a pleasant conversation with Constable Wilkins as he was closing his shop. He said the constable was always a pleasant fellow and kind to the shop owners and the citizens he came across on Denmark Street, and that the constable was in high spirits last night as well when he left him. Mr. Hughes expressed his sorrow and what a shame it was that a protector of the community could be so savagely dispatched of, with no compassion or mercy. Mr. Hughes expressed his deepest condolences to the constable's family and informed me that this afternoon, up until his shop closes at 8 in the evening, he will be holding a benefit for the constable's young family, and that a portion of his sales will go to the constable's bereaved loved ones. So stop by if you can, to Mr. Hughes' pastry shop, and support a good cause. We at the paper would also like to send our heartfelt condolences to the constable's grieving family as well. There's not much left to say. No words can change the situation. All we can do is to urgently implore Scotland Yard to catch this prowler. Sadly, the body count continues to rise. It's reached a staggering 10 souls, 10 poor unfortunates that are no longer walking this earth. And sadly, it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon, until he is stopped, or until he mercifully stops it himself, which I doubt will happen. Until tomorrow, dear readers, please stay safe. I find it delightfully blissful, the pain that I have brought to the West End masses. Their pain has brought me much pleasure. That's a good thing, I believe. One should always take pride in their work and enjoy what they're doing, and I most definitely love what I'm doing. That's why it's hilarious to read if I mercifully stop. No, Mr. Johns, I will not stop. My appetite has become satiated with the death and carnage I've inflicted upon the people. I cannot stop it. Speaking of inflicting death and carnage, I believe I'll make an appearance at this benefit for the constable at the pastry shop. I don't like loose ends, and this shop owner still breathing feels like a personal affront to my work. I made it a point to have breakfast with the family, but I tried to eat as quickly as possible, all while trying not to seem rude and impolite, but the conversation was boring me to no end. Just a bunch of drivel about the policeman's ball that my father and brother are throwing at the manor in a week's time. Before I removed myself from the dullness of that conversation, my father had the nerve to inform me I was to accompany a young madam from a prominent family to the ball. Lady Brandy Lee Smith, I was to escort, who comes from one of the most oldest and respected families in all the realm. My father has been trying to set up a match between families for years. Now it looks like he might just get his chance. I then proceeded to have to listen to my father's ramblings about me being the future head of this family, the next in line to his lands and titles, and that it was finally time to settle down and start a family of my own. I didn't have time for this conversation at the moment, so I quickly agreed and told him I would escort Lady Smith to the ball, then excuse myself from the breakfast table. I did notice once again, though, the young maid Liza staring at me. I know she saw me last night. I have a feeling this is going to be quite the problem. I got dressed in my sporting best and met James out front in the carriage. We made our way to Denmark Street, and I was standing in front of Mr. Yu's pastry shop by 12:30. I stood there looking dapper and very sharply dressed in my casuals, surrounded by these street urchins. I bowed my head and rubbed my temples. Why do I do this to myself? I thought. I really must stop putting myself in situations where I'm surrounded by these smelly savages. I made my way through the small crowd that had gathered outside the shop, some of them grazing on their pastries as if they were some cow out in a field. Hell, some even smelled like an old cow as well. Hot fur, old curdled milk, and pastry dough singed the nostrils as I reached the door to the shop. My word, these people have left me weak with their foul-smelling odors, but I quickly composed myself and opened the door, greeting the proprietor. He was quite shocked to see someone of my stature and upbringing gracing his establishment. If I had to guess, no one of my nobility has ever stepped foot in his common-looking pastry shop. He was quite gracious and humbled that I attended the benefit, and pointed me in the direction to a table in the corner after I told him why I was there. At the table sat a tired woman, young in age but aging rapidly from sadness and stress. Next to her was a small boy and girl, I'd say age 5 or 6. It was the constable's family, and I went over and paid my respects. Personally, and in an official capacity as the brother of the commissioner of the West End Police Service, I stood in front of her and looked into her tear-swelling eyes. She was so touched that someone of my importance took the time to comfort her and pay respects to the family and her husband's memory. But oh, if she only knew it was because of me that her husband is a memory. If she only knew it wasn't sympathy or remorse I was feeling, but utter joy and satisfaction at her and her family's sorrow. I took off my top hat and gave her a respectful bow and then made my leave. I don't know how much longer I would be able to keep up my charade. I then moved around the shop and greeted more of the finest the West End had to offer. Nothing but hunchbacks and lepers I was looking at, I thought. Just disgusting beasts. I could swear I saw ticks jumping from person to person like the vile dogs that they were. If they only knew that I was thinking of cutting every throat in that room, they would take 2 paces in the opposite direction. Despite my disdain for this filth that surrounded me, I persevered and carried on, mainly spending the rest of the event with Mr. Hughes, sadly learning more than I needed to have about him. but that's what one must do when they're trying to complete a task. Mostly, as this boring man kept talking throughout the day and into the night, I was thinking how I was going to accomplish dispatching him from the face of this earth. I came up with my plan, and as the benefits started to die down, I said my goodbyes and pretended to leave through the crowd, but when no one was paying attention, I managed to sneak off to the back, in the kitchen area, where I waited for everyone to leave and him to close up for the night. I must admit, I was somewhat unprepared, not having my bag and tools with me, but there were plenty of instruments at my disposal. I picked up a very large butcher knife, then backed myself into the corner, hiding in the shadows, waiting to finish what I started the previous night. I could finally hear the remaining guests start to leave, and Mr. Hughes beginning to clean up the shop. I then saw the back door to the kitchen slowly open. He walked towards the corner I was hiding in to grab his coat and leave for the evening. But as he approached, I leapt from the shadows, the knife tightly gripped in my hand next to my side. He stood back in shock for a moment, noticing who I was, and before he could utter a word, I raised said knife in the air and slashed it across his throat. He fell to his knees, gargling on his own putrid blood. I took my other hand and gripped his dirty, greasy hair. Then I proceeded to dig the butcher knife deeper and deeper into his throat, staring at him all the while, screaming at him, "No one gets away. No one gets away from the Prowler." I couldn't control myself, and in my bloodlust, I severed his head completely from his body. On the wall above the stove, written in his own blood, I put "No one escapes the Prowler." I then emptied a half sack of flour and put Mr. Yu's head inside, closed up the sack, and disposed of the butcher knife inside his rotting corpse. Then hurriedly made my way out of the shop, down Denmark Street, and into the carriage where James was waiting for me. On the way back to the manor, I tried to compose myself while inside the carriage, trying to come down from my blood high, but for some reason I could not achieve this, and when I stepped out of the carriage and snuck inside back up into my chambers, I was still filled with a blood rage that I had when I was disposing of Mr. Hughes. Just as I thought I was safe and reached the door to my chambers, I heard a noise over my shoulder from the room opposite of my own. I turned my head slowly and saw it was the young maid Liza leaving the room. I turned completely and stared at her. There was a look of shock on her face. She began to tremble now. I knew there was no escaping what I had to do. She has seen too much. I know she saw me sneaking out last night, and now she has seen me coming home late, covered in blood. I smiled at her sinisterly and reached out my hand, grabbing her wrist. I leaned forward and whispered in her ear, "Come with me, my dear. I have macabre delights to show you." I then tightly gripped her wrist and dragged her into my chambers. I covered her mouth with my hand as I reached into my bag and pulled out the large surgical knife. Her eyes widened as I brought the knife up to her throat. She began to writhe as I held her in place. I then took the knife and jammed it into her sternum, slicing all the way down her stomach. Blood began to quickly run out of her. I hastily reached for a sheet to put under her and wrap her up in. I didn't want to make a mess now. Who would clean it up? Oh well, I guess I could have James clean up the mess. I wrapped up Liza's body and told James to dispose of her somewhere near the river. It is a shame what had to be done with young Liza, but she should have known her proper place. She shouldn't have meddled in my affairs. But you know what they say. It's so hard finding good help these days. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel. Your generosity means the world to me. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories to duchessofdarkness27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at duchess.ofdarkness or Twitter at duchessofdarkn2. I want to thank you all for your support, your kindness, and your encouragement. I appreciate it so very much. Until next time.